Our scripture this morning is one verse from the story of Hagar in Genesis 16, verse 13. This verse comes after Hagar, who is pregnant with Ishmael, has run away from Sarai and Abram, and an angel of the Lord finds her in the wilderness. Genesis 16:13. So she named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are El Roi," for she said, "Have I really seen God and remained alive after seeing him?" Grace to you all and peace. I know many of you from growing up here at CMC, and David and I attended here together before going overseas in 2018. After living 1 year in Nazareth, we've now lived for 4 years in Germany. David works at the German Mennonite Peace Committee, and I am the pastor of our local Mennonite congregation.
We are very happy to be back with you, and we've been grateful for visits and encounters and conversations around town. We also look forward to visiting with some of you who will be attending our Bethlehem Bible College Solar Fundraiser evening on July 19th. We think of you all here in Goshen often and are so grateful to be back together worshiping in person.
We're glad for this chance to preach together today. That's something we've oddly done many times in the US and only once in Germany. Today we've chosen to preach on this year's lectionary focus verse in Germany. Like many other denominations, the German Mennonites closely follow the Moravian lectionary there. Lectionary practice imbues faith with a sense of rhythm and unity across space and time. This year's verse, as rendered in the German Bible and abbreviated, is very simple. "You are a God who sees me." The original Hebrew iteration of this verse, as we just heard, is even more simple. El Roi, God who sees. Here you have it in German. The person who speaks this, again, is Hagar in Genesis 16, and history is rich with different perspectives on Hagar's story. What does the text tell us about her? Well, it depends on the text.
Ecumenism and interfaith dialogue are very important in Germany, and we thought we would look at this story as it's understood in various Muslim traditions. In Islam, the king of Egypt sent his daughter, Hajar in Arabic, to Sarah as a servant of Sarah's in the household of a great prophet, Abraham. Here is a depiction of Hajar on the website of the Muslim community in Detroit. Hajar is a household subject, but as an important figure in diplomatic exchange in an era with polygamous institutions, the sexual and power elements of the story take on a completely different light than in the Bible. Hajar is more important, maybe even another wife of Abraham's, and less vulnerable. Hajar has sex with Abraham at Sarah's request and has the firstborn and heir to Abraham's legacy, Ishmael, ancestor of Muhammad and of the Arabian tribes. Sarah, a jealous first wife, attacks Hajar and makes Abraham send her away, but he escorts her personally to Mecca. Once, when they were thirsty in the desert near Mecca, an angel came to them and caused a spring to rise up out of the earth. All Muslims are to visit this spring and honor Hajar during the Hajj and commemorate God's care for those in exile. Several million Muslims did this 2 weeks ago. It's not clear how or when they came back, but an angel does not command them to return, and Abraham, of course, later passes his legacy on to Ishmael. In the Quran, it is Ishmael, as a firstborn son, who provides Abraham's great test when he's asked to sacrifice his child to God. And it is Ishmael who inherits the mainstream of Abraham's tradition. He has 12 sons, each with time becoming a nation unto itself, just like the 12 sons of Jacob, a generation further in the Jewish tradition.
The Old Testament frames the story very differently, and it can be read from different perspectives. A traditional reading is that Hagar gossips about and looks down on Sarah. She's cruel to a childless, mournful, elderly woman in a society that highly values respect for elders. It is promised that Hagar's son and his descendants will fight with everybody, which, of course, in the Western world, translates into many people's understanding of Islamic history. Violent, surrounded by enemies, terrorists. A second interpretation takes into account Hagar's place as a slave of Sarah's, whose life Sarah has the power to control. This reading more clearly recognizes Hagar's role as a potential victim survivor of sexual abuse, since the text doesn't tell us whether she was given a choice in the matter of sleeping with Abraham. It can be difficult to read in this coercive context that an angel commands Hagar to return to Abraham and Sarah, even when the message comes with a promise of safety and a great destiny. In the very next verses, God also comes to Abraham at 99 years old and tells him to circumcise all his family and slaves, and he makes everyone do it. At 99 years old, turning out the whole village to get circumcised because God told him to in private. This story, like others throughout the Bible, includes uncomfortable amounts of coercion.
We can see how the Muslim tradition and Old Testament one both have parts that feel understandable. We can feel for the women in both stories. Hagar faces sexual abuse, fear, alienation in her household, and refugeehood. Here is a depiction of her being sent away. Sarah also experiences unwelcome childlessness and apparently contempt from Hagar. Abraham is a disaster who doesn't stand up for or protect the people around him. The Muslim story is an easier read because Hajar has more status and power and is not disrespected as much. Muslim traditions often don't have as many tragedies or such flawed characters as Judeo-Christian stories. Jesus not being crucified, for example, with the note that this Christian tradition of his crucifixion dishonors a great prophet. Many accounts of Old Testament stories are much rosier in Islam.
One positive part of this story in the Bible and in Islam is that Isaac and Ishmael are not enemies at all. There's nothing in the Bible about that or in the Muslim telling of the story, and the two brothers come together to bury their father. Only Isaac's children are enemies with one another, but Jacob and Esau also reconcile. Like their Jewish and Muslim descendants in almost all times and places of overlap, these people lived basically in safety with each other, perhaps even in peace. We think it's important to point this out when talking about Israel-Palestine, because there were very substantial Jewish minorities throughout the Muslim world for almost all of the last 1,300 years. Jewish-Muslim relations have always been complicated, like any religion's relations, but rarely awful. In fact, not only Jewish minorities, but other non-monotheistic groups like Yazidis, Hindus, and African traditional religions have coexisted, tolerated, or even been welcomed in the Muslim world. European Christians, in contrast, eliminated pre-Christian groups with the exception of Jews, who have also faced serial episodes of mass ethnic violence, including the Holocaust. The record of tolerance by Muslims compares very favorably from a historical perspective.
Hajar's trust in God takes on special significance in the history of faiths. Whether Hajar was a slave who endured abuse with dignity and produced a great line, or a princess who represented her people in a new space, her family bridging these worlds is special. She's admired in the Bible and in the Quran, and her dignity and faith are this year in Germany the subject of maybe hundreds or maybe thousands of sermons. Leftist and right-wing women once debated on the floor of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, how her story should be taught in schools. In Islam, Ishmael's children's tribes make their homes in a variety of regions, from the Levant down to today's Yemen. This origin story represents a vital point of togetherness of the peoples of these regions. And Hagar's union with Abraham points towards a togetherness of Egypt and of Canaan, a strong contrast in the Islamic world's narrative with the Old Testament narrative of deliverance out of Egypt.
So far, this sermon has been an example of something we do often in our work, trying to help show another perspective, and more specifically, trying to help tell the stories of refugees, of migrant people with Middle Eastern emphasis. It's fitting that this story connects with Muslim Judeo-Christian relations because connecting Israel-Palestine has remained a focus for us in the years since we left Nazareth. David has led 2 Israel-Palestine learning tours. We've helped people connect with opportunities for giving, service, and study, planned additional upcoming tours, some with many of you, and fundraised for a solar project at Bethlehem Bible College. The Bible College is a longtime partner and host to North American Mennonite leaders like Melissa Flora Bixler, and Nelson Crable just within the last year. Supporting this partnership is an ongoing part of our work. One set of stories we feel especially drawn to are those of people we know in Palestine, folks whose families have been separated or have been violently attacked, people who face violence, fear, and exile in their own homes. Sadly, we know 5 people personally who have been severely beaten in the last couple of years, and some of them have close family members who have experienced that form of violence as well. Lifelong friends of my family, the Zogbis, are also semi-permanently separated as a family. The American mother denied the chance to live with her husband of over 30 years and family in Bethlehem. The sorts of mob violence, regular killings, and powerlessness of half the population that we hear about in Israel-Palestine disturbs us a lot.
Our work brings us into connection with other refugee stories too. I taught German for 3 years at the Friedenshaus, a program for supporting refugees not far from where we live in Germany. There I got to know many who fled war to come to Germany. That has had a surprising intersection with Israel-Palestine work as well, as I came to know 3 families who came from Syria, but were actually made in a prior generation refugees out of Israel-Palestine. I also got to know an Iranian soil scientist whose publications I've gotten to edit in English and who I kept in touch with during his long 3-year process of securing refugee status and bringing his wife and daughter from Iran to Germany. Like many of the refugees at the Friedenshaus, he was modest, quiet, and dignified, despite being subjected to absurd legal and logistical obstacles while escaping a life-threatening situation and being separated from his family for 3 years. Supporting a team that assists refugees with legal issues and human rights abuses is also part of my work for the German Mennonite Peace Committee. We fundraise for a team on the Greek island of Lesbos and publicize their work. Our team of 4 on Lesbos does tremendous work with very few resources. They've helped expose many faulty charges, helped human rights organizations keep an eye on individual cases and large-scale conditions at camps for refugees. They've helped families from Somalia and Syria with identifying their dead sons and securing them places at Muslim graveyards. Last year, they accompanied 3 men who had driven the boat of refugees that they were taking to Europe, among many similar cases. Such men, simply the boat drivers, are prosecuted under human smuggling laws designed for punishing sex trafficking and slavery, even though they are actually just themselves refugees who are sitting at the helm. These 3 men that you see on screen were sentenced collectively to 439 years in prison. On the day of the trial, one of the young men, 32 years old, learned his father had been executed in Syria by the Assad regime. His mother was allowed to listen in on the trial on the phone, but not allowed to talk to him. He got 126 years for human smuggling, a painful illustration of the axis of despair and dehumanization that migrants so often face on the southern borders of Europe and of the United States. Thankfully, now, as in biblical times, we have laws and traditions to protect migrants. The court assigns so many years because they know the verdict can be challenged, cut down, taken away, that people can be set free to return to their spouses, to their lives. Our team's closest partner on Lesbos is HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which provides legal assistance, acting out of the Jewish tradition. Our team does research, referrals, monitoring of abuse and irregularities, and together with HIAS works to set people free. One of many reminders of how Abrahamic faiths can work together for the most vulnerable among us.
In the story of Hagar, we see a powerful vision of dislocation, abuse, loss, as well as comfort and promise for a better future. Today, as then, people endure great dislocation and suffering to pass a better future on to their children. And our response to this suffering is clear. In the biblical tradition, we are gifted with a vast assortment of stories of migration and liberation and mandates for how to engage with migrants in their journey.
I was a stranger, and you invited me in.
Always remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God redeemed you from your slavery.
Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt.
Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it.
When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you. I am the Lord your God.
Cursed is anyone who withholds justice from the foreigner, the parentless, or the widow. And all the people together say,